Can a corset be feminist? That's a question Prada posed with her 2016 fall collection, sending corsets down the runway in unexpected ways, layered over tailored peacoats or underneath brocade evening dresses. Her designs were striking, corsets that looked more like orthopedic supports, boldly styled to provoke thought. Prada described the collection with a single line: "Fashion is about the everyday and the history of women." And what better symbol encapsulates that history of restriction, empowerment, and transformation than the corset? Take a closer look at Prada's approach. Some corsets were layered over suits made of menswear fabrics. Was she challenging gender norms, adding nuance to traditional silhouettes, or simply celebrating women who dress on their own terms without catering to the male gaze? The corset has long been controversial, often seen as a symbol of oppression. Since the 19th century, it has represented an idealized, exaggerated version of femininity: impossibly small waists, emphasized hips, and uplifted busts. It's a garment with a clear connection to the politics of women's bodies, one that continues to spark debate. But today the question isn't just about history. What does it mean when a woman chooses to wear a corset now? Whether inspired by fashion trends or by the Kardashians' infamous waist trainers, is it about embracing restriction or exploring freedom? Is she conforming to traditional ideals of femininity or experimenting with her own identity and power? It's telling that corsets are reemerging at a time when women's roles are more fluid and ever-changing. Perhaps the corset's duality, its association with both restriction and empowerment, makes it the perfect symbol for this moment. So, can a corset be feminist? Maybe it's not about the garment itself, but how it's worn and why. Whether it's a tool of self-expression, a nod to history, or a way to reclaim and redefine femininity, the answer is as multifaceted as the women who wear it. To understand this revival, we have to look back. The corset saw two major comebacks in the 20th century. First, in 1947 with Christian Dior's New Look. Dior reintroduced corsets, ironically calling them waspies, to cinch waists into impossibly tiny shapes. Though lighter and less rigid than their Victorian counterparts, these corsets still carried echoes of the past, emphasizing traditional femininity. The second revival in the 1980s took a different turn, subverting expectations by using the corset as a symbol of rebellion and empowerment. It became a bold statement, reshaping its meaning in the modern era. In 1939, Horst P. Horst captured one of Vogue's most iconic photographs, a woman facing away, her arms raised to meet her bent head, wearing a partially tied corset. The image is undeniably sensual, but its restrained eroticism is overshadowed by a subtle melancholy. Interestingly, the photograph almost didn't happen. Horst took it just before boarding a ship to America, calling it peculiar in hindsight. This duality, the corset's allure and its emotional undertone, speaks to its deeply complex symbolism. In the mid-20th century, Christian Dior's New Look solidified the corset's role as a cultural flashpoint. His designs reintroduced tightly cinched waists paired with full skirts, garments that celebrated opulence but restricted mobility. Dior's vision was a conservative one, portraying femininity as delicate and ornamental. Although fashion history often tells us that women eagerly embraced Dior's designs, the reality was divided. In post-war America, women formed groups like the Little Below the Knee Club to protest Dior's cumbersome skirts, which sometimes used over 130 feet of fabric. Meanwhile, in Europe, these corseted, impractical silhouettes symbolized wealth and idleness, implying that women who wore them neither needed to nor could work. This was in stark contrast to the wartime years when women drove ambulances, worked in factories, and defied traditional roles. Dior's design sent them back into the domestic sphere, and the corset became a symbol of inequality, both social and sexual. Yet, as restrictive a corset might seem, its history is more nuanced. For centuries, men also wore versions of corsetry. In the 18th century, young boys and girls of noble birth were laced into stays, the corset's precursor. Even adult men incorporated bone stays into their coats for posture and structure, long before tailoring replaced them. Fast forward to the 19th century, and the idea of men wearing corsets became taboo. Male corsets were hidden, viewed as a threat to masculinity. By 1889, one English observer wrote, the Lord preserved the nation from a generation of male corset wearers, equating the practice with effeminacy and, by extension, homosexuality. Today, those same biases linger. When corsets appear in menswear, they're often a deliberate challenge to gender norms, creating an image of vulnerability or objectification, transforming a man into a symbol traditionally associated with women. This subversion provokes conversations about power, identity, and society's expectations of both genders. So, is the corset merely a relic of oppression or a tool for self-expression? Its story is woven into history, art, and fashion, making it more than just a garment. It's a canvas for cultural dialogue. The 1980s marked a pivotal moment for the corset. It was reclaimed not just as a symbol of femininity, but also of feminism. Designers of the era didn't reject its sexual politics. Instead, they embraced and redefined them. The first radical step was making the invisible visible. No longer confined to shaping the body beneath clothing, the corset emerged as a bold statement piece. In 1989, Jean-Paul Gaultier famously dressed Madonna in a pink satin corset with conical stitched breasts, evoking Dior's waspy foundation garments. However, Vivienne Westwood had already begun this transformation years earlier. In her 1982-83 Buffalo Girls collection, she introduced the concept of underwear as outerwear, featuring quilted satin bras worn over sweatshirts. By the late 1980s, Westwood had taken the corset even further, designing elastic-sided pieces inspired by 18th century stays. Her corsets weren't hidden beneath dresses, they stood alone, often paired with nothing more than leggings, turning a historically restrictive garment into an ironic, empowered statement of post-second wave feminism. Interestingly, the corset's association with feminism isn't solely modern. In the 19th century, the practice of tight lacing, where women reduced their waists to seemingly impossible measurements, was most popular among working-class women rather than the elite. Historian Anne Hollander noted that these women embraced the corset, much like modern wearers adopt sky-high heels or elaborate nail art. However, this resurgence reflects a larger cultural fixation on hyper-exaggerated, artificial silhouettes, the kind popularized on Instagram. The corset, as a garment, straddles the line between fashion's artistic ideals and societal expectations. It's one of the few pieces that can exist seamlessly in both a Prada runway show and a Playboy spread, symbolizing its enduring, multifaceted appeal. We're living in a time where people are obsessed with cosmetic surgery, crash diets, and other quick-fix transformations. The faster and more extreme the results, the better. Maybe that's why the corset is making a comeback. No other garment reshapes the body so dramatically. Unlike 18th century pannier skirts or 19th century bustles that just added padding or extended the silhouette, the corset works directly on the body itself, kneading, squeezing, and shifting flesh to literally sculpt a new figure for the wearer. No gym membership required. Back in the 19th century, satirists joked about husbands being roped into lacing their wives into their corsets. Why? Partly because it took more strength than a lady's maid might have, and partly as a way for men to check if their wives had loosened or retied the laces, possibly with the help of a lover. It was fashioned as a tool of control, a way to reinforce female subservience. What's fascinating about today's revival is how the meaning has flipped. Now, when a woman wears a corset, it's not about submission, it's about empowerment. It's about owning her body, her sexuality, and her femininity. She's the one holding the laces, the one in charge of shaping her own identity.